Thanksgiving dinner, a 43-year tradition, turned into a nightmare. My daughter-in-law, Vivian, trashed my carefully prepared meal, then spat directly in my face, declaring it revolting slop. My son just sat there, stunned. I simply smiled, wiping my cheek. She had no idea what was coming. This story gets wild. Like, share, and tell me where you're listening from. The aroma of roasted turkey, sage stuffing, and pumpkin pie had always been the true soundtrack to Eleanor's Thanksgiving. For 43 years since her first Thanksgiving as a newlywed with George, this symphony of scents had filled her home, signaling a day of gratitude, family, and abundance. Now, at 65, a widow for nearly a decade, Eleanor still approached the holiday with the same meticulous devotion. Every dish was a testament to tradition, a loving recreation of recipes and passed down through generations. The turkey, basted to a golden crispness, rested on a platter, ready to be carved. The green bean casserole, a creamy concoction topped with perfectly fried onions, sat steaming beside a glistening bowl of cranberry sauce. She hummed softly as she arranged the last place setting, a small, contented smile playing on her lips. This was her legacy, her joy. The doorbell chimed a little before the agreed time. Eleanor's smile widened, anticipating her son. She opened the door to see Leo, her 38-year-old boy, standing on the porch. But her heart sank almost immediately. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes shadowed with an exhaustion that seemed to reach deep into his bones. His usually neatly combed brown hair was disheveled, and the sharp lines of worry etched around his mouth were more pronounced than usual. He offered her a tired hug, a faint scent of the office clinging to his clothes. "You look worn out, darling," Eleanor murmured, patting his arm. "Is everything all right?" Leo simply offered a weak smile. "Just a long week, Mom, you know how it is." He didn't meet her gaze, a familiar evasion that immediately caused Eleanor to wonder about Vivian, his wife. Her daughter-in-law often had that effect on Leo, draining him of his usual vibrant energy. Precisely 30 minutes later, just as Eleanor was considering whether to keep the food warm, the doorbell rang again. This time, there was a different energy in the air, a subtle shift that made the festive warmth of her kitchen feel a little colder. Vivian, 34, swept in, a vision of polished perfection. Her blonde hair was styled in an immaculate, intricate braid, and her tailored dress, a sleek emerald green, hugged her slender frame flawlessly. Not a strand out of place, not a crease in her expensive fabric. She smelled of some exotic, expensive perfume that clashed slightly with the comforting aromas of the holiday meal. "Eleanor," Vivian stated, her voice cool and devoid of warmth, a mere acknowledgement rather than a greeting. She didn't offer a hug, didn't even extend her hand. Her gaze swept over the meticulously set table, then paused on the array of dishes. A slight curl of her lip betrayed her disdain. "Vivian, dear, happy Thanksgiving," Eleanor managed, trying to inject some cheer into the strained air. "Everything is ready." Vivian's eyes landed on the green bean casserole. "Oh, that," she said, a dismissive wave of her perfectly manicured hand. "Still with the canned soup and fried onions, are we? I thought perhaps you might have branched out this year, tried something fresh. You know, actual vegetables, not just processed soup and fried onions." Her tone was light, almost conversational, yet it was a razor's edge. Eleanor felt the familiar sting, a dull ache that had become a constant companion whenever Vivian was near. Leo, who had been quietly taking off his coat, stirred. "Mom's green bean casserole is a classic, Vivian," he began, his voice a little too meek, a little too tentative. "It's been a family favorite for decades." Eleanor quickly interjected, her hand gently touching Leo's arm. "It's quite all right, dear. Vivian has always preferred her own take on things." She offered Vivian a placating smile, a gesture she had perfected over the years of navigating her daughter-in-law's passive aggression. Keeping the peace was paramount, even if it meant the swallowing a little bit of her pride each time. They moved to the dining table. Vivian, with an almost theatrical air, chose the seat directly across from Eleanor, ensuring that every plate, every gesture, and every word could be directly observed and judged. The meal commenced, or rather, the inquisition began. "This turkey looks a little dry, doesn't it?" Vivian remarked, poking at a slice with her fork, though she hadn't yet taken a bite. A few minutes later, after sampling the stuffing, she grimaced. The stuffing is quite salty. Is that store-bought broth you used, Eleanor? Then the mashed potatoes. These mashed potatoes are a bit lumpy, aren't they? I always whip mine until they're absolutely silken. Eleanor simply smiled, nodded, and offered a soft, I'm so sorry, dear. I'll try to do better next time. 5 years. 5 years of this, and Eleanor had learned that defiance only fueled the fire. Acquiescence, as painful as it was the only path to a semblance of peace, particularly for Leo's sake. Vivian then turned her attention back to the green bean casserole, the dish she had dismissed earlier. She scooped a small portion onto her plate, a deliberate act as if she were a scientist examining a dubious specimen. She brought the fork to her lips, tasted it, and then, without warning, she spat the mouthful directly onto her plate. The clatter of the fork as it dropped onto the ceramic was shockingly loud in the sudden silence. Absolutely revolting, she declared, her voice now losing its cool composure, a brittle edge creeping in. Then she stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a jarring scrape across the polished floor. All pretense of polite disinterest shattered. Her face, usually so composed, was contorted with disgust. You know what, Eleanor? She practically shouted, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. I am sick and tired of pretending this food is edible. She began to gesture wildly, her arms sweeping through the air, knocking a napkin onto the floor. You call this garbage food? This is supposed to be Thanksgiving dinner? Her voice rose to a shrill crescendo, echoing in the quiet dining room. Eleanor watched, her heart thumping against her ribs, but an unfamiliar stillness had settled over her. She knew this dance. Vivian then leaned across the table, her eyes blazing with an unprecedented fury. Before Eleanor could even flinch, Vivian's lips pursed, and she spat directly into Eleanor's face. A cold, wet spray landed on Eleanor's cheek, running down toward her chin. The sheer audacity of the act, the raw, visceral disrespect, made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. Cook it again, Vivian shrieked, her voice hoarse now, thick with contempt. All of it, because I wouldn't feed this slop to a dog. Leo sat frozen, his fork halfway to his mouth, his eyes wide with shock and horror. His face was pale, his jaw slack. He said nothing, did nothing. He was utterly paralyzed by his wife's cruelty, unable to move, unable to defend his mother. A strange calm washed over Eleanor. The cold spittle on her cheek felt like a physical awakening. Instead of the explosion of anger or tears everyone might have expected, a small, almost imperceptible smile began to form on her lips. Slowly, deliberately, she reached up and wiped her cheek with the back of her hand, her gaze steady, unwavering, fixed on Vivian. It was a knowing smile, one that held the weight of years of silent observation and a sudden, quiet certainty. Of course, dear, Eleanor replied, her voice surprisingly soft, utterly devoid of emotion, yet firm. I'll start over. Vivian stared at her, her own rage flickering, perhaps surprised by Eleanor's lack of reaction. Then, with a final contemptuous glare, she spun on her heel and stormed out of the house, the front door slamming shut with a resounding bang that rattled the windows. As the echoes faded, Eleanor felt a peculiar sense of power bloom within her. Vivian had no idea, she had absolutely no idea of the beautiful revelation that awaited her. The sharp click-clack of Vivian's designer heels receded, fading into the crisp autumn air as she stormed away. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Leo's soft, almost inaudible murmurs. I'm so sorry, Mom, he mumbled, his gaze fixed on the tablecloth, unable to meet her eyes. She's just really stressed with work lately. Things are intense at the office. His excuses were hollow, fragile things, almost as broken as the illusion of their family Thanksgiving. He didn't try to wipe the spittle from Eleanor's face, didn't try to comfort her. He simply sat there, a shell of the vibrant sun she once knew, before finally standing and quietly retreating, leaving Eleanor alone amidst the ruins of her dining room and her carefully prepared meal. But in that wreckage, a strange, potent sense of power began to stir within Eleanor. The spittle on her cheek had been a baptism, a confirmation. It was the final straw, the culmination of years of quiet torment. What Vivian, and even Leo, didn't know was that Eleanor had anticipated this moment. Not perhaps the exact theatricality of the spitting, but certainly the eruption. She had been planning for it, preparing for it, for months. The calm she had displayed wasn't an act of surrender, but an act of profound, calculated strength. Her mind drifted back 5 years to the day Leo first introduced Vivian. Eleanor remembered it vividly. He had been beaming, a joyous light in his eyes that Eleanor hadn't seen since he was a boy. "Mom, this is Vivian," he'd said, his voice thick with adoration. Vivian had been dazzling, all polished charm and easy laughter. She wore a dress that shimmered, and her smile was radiant, seemingly genuine. She complimented Eleanor's home, her garden, her cooking. "Leo has told me so much about you, Eleanor. You're just as wonderful as he described." But Eleanor, with the wisdom gained from a turbulent, early marriage to a man who had mastered the art of manipulation, saw it immediately. Vivian's eyes, though sparkling, held a calculating glint. Her compliments felt a fraction too perfect, her laughter a shade too rehearsed. Eleanor recognized the subtle tells, the almost imperceptible shifts in tone, the way Vivian would subtly steer conversations. She saw the wolf in sheep's clothing, even if Leo, blinded by love, couldn't. The insidious campaign began almost immediately. In front of Leo, Vivian was the picture of an attentive, loving fiancé. "Eleanor, your garden is absolutely divine. I wish I had your green thumb," she'd gush. But the moment Leo stepped away to grab a drink or answer a call, her smile would tighten, her eyes would harden. "Though perhaps you overwater the hydrangeas, they look a little tired." Or after complimenting Eleanor's vintage teacups to Leo, she would lean in close to Eleanor and whisper, "Such a shame these aren't quite in vogue anymore. So much dust they must collect." Each dig was small, precise, designed to chip away at Eleanor's confidence, always delivered with a smile that belied the barb. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, Vivian began to isolate Leo. His Sunday football games with his old college friends became fewer and further between. His weekly woodworking hobby in the garage, a passion he shared with his late father, dwindled. "Darling, don't you think it's a bit messy out there?" Vivian would sigh. "And that wood dust is dreadful for your lungs." Instead, weekends were increasingly spent visiting Vivian's parents in the Hamptons or attending her extended family's elaborate brunches. Holidays with Eleanor became a rarity. "Oh, Eleanor, we'd absolutely love to join you, but Vivian's mother simply insists we spend Christmas with them this year," Leo would say, his voice laced with an apologetic resignation that broke Eleanor's heart. The whispers began, always just loud enough for Eleanor to overhear, always framed with a veneer of concern. "Leo, darling, your mother seemed a little intense today, didn't she? So particular about the details." Or to a friend over the phone while Eleanor was within earshot, "Poor Eleanor, she's getting a little senile, I think. She keeps forgetting things. We should probably keep an eye on her." Each comment was a tiny pinprick designed to erode Eleanor's sense of self and sow doubt in Leo's mind. Eleanor was still grappling with the profound loneliness that had settled upon her after Arthur's passing. Her husband had been her rock, her confidant, her entire world. The grief was a fresh wound, even years later. And Vivian, with chilling precision, weaponized it. "Eleanor, you talk about Arthur so much. Don't you think it's a bit morbid for Leo? He needs to move forward, not constantly dwell on the past." Or after Eleanor shared a fond memory, "It's lovely that you have those memories, but you can't live in them forever. It's not healthy." Vivian twisted Eleanor's grief, her precious memories, into something burdensome and unhealthy. Eleanor watched her sensitive, kind son disappear, piece by piece. His calls became infrequent, morphing from daily chats to weekly, then bi-weekly check-ins. Always hurried, always with an underlying tension. His visits, once a joyful ritual, ceased almost entirely. He no longer shared his dreams, his worries, his day-to-day life with her. The distance grew, not just geographical but emotional, a vast chasm that Vivian had carefully dug between them. Then came Eleanor's 63rd birthday. For 38 years, Leo had never forgotten, not once. He'd sent cards from summer camp, called from college dorms, and always made sure to be there in person with flowers and a homemade gift. But that year, the phone remained silent. 2 days later, a curt text message arrived from Leo. "Sorry, Mom, forgot about your birthday. Vivian was really busy, and it just slipped my mind." A few minutes later, another text, clearly from Vivian, though sent from Leo's aunt's phone. "Honestly, Eleanor, if you wanted us to remember, you should have sent a reminder. You know how busy we are." The implication was clear. It was Eleanor's fault for not managing their schedule. After their wedding, the isolation intensified, becoming an almost absolute siege. Every family gathering, every holiday, every potential opportunity for Eleanor to reconnect with her son came with Vivian's meticulously crafted conditions. Mysterious headaches would suddenly flare up, or urgent work commitments would demand their immediate attention. These were always announced with just enough notice to disrupt Eleanor's plans, but too little to reschedule. When they did visit, which was rare, Vivian would spend the entire time glued to her phone, scrolling through social media or taking calls from her work. If she spoke to Eleanor, it was only to make another series of passive-aggressive comments, always delivered with an air of sophisticated pity. "Oh, Eleanor, these old-fashioned lace doilies are so charming, but aren't they just dreadful for collecting dust?" Or, "This wallpaper, it's certainly traditional, isn't it? I saw a fabulous modern update in a magazine that would make this place feel so much lighter." And then there was the food. Eleanor's cooking, a source of pride and comfort for decades, became a constant target. "These dishes are so heavy, Eleanor," she would say, pushing her plate away after barely tasting it. "All that butter and cream, not really good for us, is it? We try to stick to much lighter, healthier options now. For our health." Each comment was designed to sound caring, concerned even. Yet the underlying message was brutally clear. Eleanor's choices, her traditions, her very essence were outdated, unhealthy, and simply not good enough. It was a slow, agonizing erosion, a systematic dismantling of Eleanor's world, meticulously orchestrated by Vivian. But Eleanor had watched, listened, and learned. And in that moment, as Vivian's spittle ran down her cheek, Eleanor knew that the time for silent endurance was over. The time for her own carefully planned counterattack had finally arrived. The spittle on her cheek had been the final definitive catalyst. But the true breaking point, the moment Eleanor decided to irrevocably change the narrative of her life and her relationship with her son, had happened nearly a year prior during the previous Christmas. Weeks Eleanor had spent preparing for it. Her home, a sanctuary of festive warmth, had been transformed. She'd baked dozens of cookies, wrapped each gift with meticulous care, and most importantly, she'd chosen the perfect real pine tree from the local farm. It stood in her living room, a majestic fir, its boughs heavy with twinkling lights and cherished ornaments, filling the air with the evocative scent of fresh pine. Leo and Vivian arrived exactly on time, a rare occurrence. But the moment Vivian stepped through the door, her perfectly composed face twisted into an expression of theatrical distress. She gasped, hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Eleanor, a real pine tree? I, I have a severe pine allergy." She began to cough delicately, though Eleanor saw no immediate signs of irritation. Vivian, however, continued to fan herself dramatically. 20 minutes. That's all they stayed. Leo, looking apologetic and utterly helpless, escorted his supposedly ailing wife back to their car, leaving Eleanor standing alone in her festive, pine-scented living room. That Christmas night, Eleanor sat amidst the glowing lights, surrounded by lovingly wrapped, unopened gifts. The aroma of pine, once a source of comfort, now felt like a cruel mockery. As she stared at the beautiful tree that had made her daughter-in-law sick, a cold, hard resolve solidified within her. She was done. Done being the quiet, unassuming widow. Done being the target of passive-aggressive barbs and outright cruelty. She would change the narrative. Eleanor understood precisely how Vivian perceived her. A lonely, aging widow, living modestly on the remnants of Arthur's small life insurance policy and her Social Security. Vivian saw her as someone whose best years were behind her, financially dependent, perhaps even a burden. A woman who lived in an outdated house and cooked heavy old-fashioned dishes. In Vivian's eyes, Eleanor was helpless, irrelevant, clinging to a past that had no bearing on their sophisticated, modern lives. Vivian couldn't have been more wrong. 7 years prior, just before his unexpected passing, Arthur had left Eleanor a final cryptic challenge. He'd pressed a document into her hand, a patent for a specialized manufacturing process. His voice low and earnest. "Eleanor, this isn't much on paper, but I believe it's valuable. Don't let anyone talk you into selling it for a pittance. Promise me you'll see its true worth." At the time, Eleanor, still reeling from grief, had tucked it away, unsure what to make of it. She assumed it was a small inheritance, a token from Arthur's tinkering days. A few months later, a small engineering firm approached her, offering a modest sum for the patent. It was enough to cover some bills, a comfortable cushion. But Arthur's words echoed in her mind. Don't let anyone talk you into selling it for a pittance. Instead of taking the easy money, Eleanor decided to honor his legacy. At 58, a widow with no formal business training, she embarked on a 6-month odyssey of self-education. She devoured books on intellectual property, manufacturing processes, and business licensing. She attended online seminars, networked with patent attorneys, and spoke to anyone who would listen about niche industrial applications. Her late husband, a brilliant but unassuming engineer, had given her a key, and she was determined to unlock the door. She made a strategic decision. She licensed Arthur's patent under her maiden name, Opal Morrison. It was a conscious choice, a way to create a separate identity, a shield against any perceived vulnerability associated with being Arthur's widow. Opal Morrison was a new entity, sharp and focused, distinct from the Eleanor Leo and Vivian knew. The royalties, small at first, began to trickle in. Then they grew. Within 2 years, the monthly income from that single patent was more than Eleanor used to earn in an entire year from her modest administrative job before she retired. The numbers were staggering, far exceeding Arthur's quiet optimism. The specialized process, though niche, was proving to be incredibly efficient and cost-effective for several key industries. Eleanor didn't stop there. Within 4 years, she used those initial royalties as seed money. She started investing in other promising, underutilized patents in related fields. She hired a small team of engineers and business development experts. Morrison Consulting was born, a manufacturing consulting firm specializing in optimizing production lines through proprietary processes and innovative intellectual property. By the time Vivian had spat in her face, Morrison Consulting was no longer a small venture. It was a thriving, highly profitable enterprise, generating over $2 million annually. Eleanor wasn't just earning royalties. She was a CEO, a successful businesswoman. Her outdated house, which Vivian so disdainfully critiqued, was fully owned, a cash asset. Her investments were substantial, diversified, and growing steadily. She had quietly built an empire. She now employed 43 people across 2 distinct locations, all dedicated to the growth and success of Morrison Consulting. Yet her own son, Leo, and her daughter-in-law, Vivian, knew absolutely nothing of this immense success. To them, she was still Eleanor, the sweet, slightly senile widow who struggled with technology and spent her days gardening. Eleanor had kept her empire a secret for several reasons. Partially, it was out of a cautious, almost instinctual desire to protect her burgeoning wealth and privacy. But mostly it was to observe, to truly see the colors of her family when they believed she had nothing but her unwavering love to offer. She wanted to understand the unfiltered dynamic, unclouded by any potential financial interest. What she saw was disheartening. Leo, her beloved son, had come to view her, if not as a direct burden, then certainly as a responsibility, a relic of a past he was eager to shed. And Vivian, with her endless criticisms and calculated slights, saw Eleanor as nothing more than an obstacle to Leo's full, unadulterated devotion, a barrier to her complete control over her husband. Neither truly valued her for who she was, independent of their perceptions. But now, as the cold spittle dried on her cheek, that profound dynamic was about to dramatically shift. The quiet, unassuming widow was about to reveal her true colors, and the world, especially Vivian's world, was about to be turned upside down. The trap, meticulously set, began to spring into motion 3 weeks before that fateful Thanksgiving. Eleanor had been diligently reviewing resumes for a new senior marketing coordinator, a key position within her expanding firm. Her assistant, Sarah, had narrowed down the pile to a promising shortlist. As Eleanor scrolled through the digital files, a name jumped out at her, making her pause. Vivian Williams. Eleanor clicked open the file, a slow, deliberate movement. The credentials were, on paper, impressive. A top-tier university, a string of seemingly successful roles at well-known agencies. The salary requirements were ambitious, typical of someone who believed herself to be indispensable. What truly caught Eleanor's attention, however, was a subtle undercurrent in the cover letter, an almost palpable desperation for immediate employment, thinly veiled beneath a veneer of professional confidence. Vivian Williams, her daughter-in-law, was looking for a job, and judging by the desperation, she needed one badly. Vivian, of course, had no idea that Morrison Consulting even existed, let alone that it was owned and operated by her unassuming mother-in-law, Eleanor. The company operated under Eleanor's maiden name, a deliberate choice that now paid dividends. Eleanor read Vivian's cover letter again, her gaze lingering on phrases like proactive problem solver and team-oriented leader. A slow, knowing smile, precisely the same smile that would form on her lips on Thanksgiving Day, began to spread across Eleanor's face. This was better than she could have ever orchestrated. Vivian was applying for a senior marketing coordinator position, a role that commanded a salary of $95,000 a year, a significant jump from what Eleanor knew she was earning previously. Vivian clearly believed herself to be invaluable, a sentiment that grated on Eleanor, knowing the reality of her daughter-in-law's contributions. Eleanor meticulously planned Vivian's first day. She instructed Sarah to prepare all the standard new hire paperwork, IT access, and a welcome packet. She ensured that Vivian's office would be one of the most visible, directly across from the main conference room, a subtle spotlight. Everything was set for a perfectly ordinary onboarding, except for one critical detail. Monday morning, the day Vivian was scheduled to begin, Eleanor arrived at the Morrison Consulting offices at 6:30 a.m., a full 2 hours before her new hire was due. The city was still waking up, a soft glow on the horizon. Eleanor settled into her expansive corner office, the glass walls offering a panoramic view of the bustling metropolis below. From this vantage point, she could survey the city where she had, quietly and methodically, built an empire from the ashes of grief and the steel of her own determination. It was a tangible testament to her resilience, a stark contrast to the small, unassuming home Vivian believed she inhabited. At 7:45 a.m., a chime from her intercom announced Sarah's voice, crisp and professional. "Ms. Morrison, the new senior marketing coordinator, Ms. Williams has arrived. She's early." Eleanor suppressed a smile. Of course she was. Punctuality was a virtue Vivian only practiced when it served her. "Excellent, Sarah. Please have her fill out the initial paperwork with HR. Then in exactly 15 minutes, send her directly to my office for a personal orientation. I'd like to welcome her myself." While she waited, Eleanor reviewed Vivian's resume one last time. She noted the carefully worded achievements, the slightly inflated claims of project success. She also cross-referenced some of the references, discreetly digging deeper than an HR department might. Her investigation had uncovered that Vivian had been let go from her previous position not due to restructuring, as claimed, but due to interpersonal conflicts and a tendency to undermine colleagues. It confirmed every instinct Eleanor had about her daughter-in-law. Precisely at 8 a.m., Eleanor heard Vivian's confident, somewhat imperious voice in the hallway chatting with Sarah. Vivian was completely oblivious, radiating an air of self-importance, undoubtedly convinced she was walking into another company she would soon dominate. The irony was almost too delicious. Then the door to Eleanor's office opened. Sarah stepped in first, her polite smile unwavering. "Ms. Morrison, this is Miss Vivian Williams." Eleanor's chair was initially turned towards the expansive window, her back to the door, giving Vivian a moment to register the luxurious office, the impressive view, the sheer scale of the operation. Slowly, with a theatrical grace honed over decades of quiet observation, Eleanor turned her chair. Vivian's entrance had been brimming with the practiced confidence of a seasoned professional. She had extended her hand, a dazzling, perfectly rehearsed smile plastered on her face, ready to charm the founder and CEO she assumed would be a detached elderly figurehead. But as Eleanor's face came into full view, the professional smile on Vivienne's lips crumbled, collapsing into a mixture of utter disbelief and dawning horror. Her outstretched hand froze in midair, trembling slightly. Her mouth fell open, a silent gasp escaping her lips. The vibrant color drained from her face, leaving it ashen. This is your company, Vivienne whispered, the words barely audible, her voice a fragile thread of shock. Her eyes darted around the opulent office, then back to Eleanor, as if trying to reconcile the two images. The unassuming, slightly too traditional widow from Thanksgiving, and the formidable CEO seated before her. Eleanor offered a faint, knowing smile, the same quiet certainty in her eyes that had been there on Thanksgiving. "Do sit down, Vivian. Welcome to Morrison Consulting." She gestured to the plush leather chair opposite her desk. "Yes, it is my company. I founded it 7 years ago, actually." Vivian, still reeling, tried to regain some semblance of composure. But this is an incredible coincidence, Eleanor. My goodness." Her voice was still shaky, but she was already trying to spin the narrative, to minimize the shock. Eleanor leaned forward slightly, her gaze piercing. "Coincidence?" she repeated softly, the word hanging in the air, thick with unspoken meaning. "Perhaps. Or perhaps, Vivian, it's simply the way the world works." Don't miss a single moment of this unfolding drama. If you're gripped by Eleanor's story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next as the tables turn on Vivian. Vivian, still reeling from the shock, sat stiffly in the plush leather chair, her earlier confidence replaced by a precarious composure. Eleanor, feigning a deep dive into Vivian's resume on her screen, broke the silence. "So, Vivian, your application states a desire for a challenging role and an opportunity to make a significant impact within a growing organization." She looked up, her expression unreadable. "Is that still accurate?" Vivian, ever the performer, managed a shaky but eager nod. "Absolutely, Ms. Morrison. I thrive in dynamic environments where my skills can be truly utilized. I believe I can be an invaluable asset to Morrison Consulting." She was likely calculating, even now, how she could charm her way through this impossible situation, how she could perhaps leverage this unexpected twist to her advantage. Eleanor allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to play on her lips. "Good, because I believe in direct communication and clear expectations. As the senior marketing coordinator, you will report directly to me." Eleanor paused, letting the weight of that statement hang in the air. "And your performance, your attitude, and especially your ability to work collaboratively with your colleagues will be closely monitored, not just by me, but by everyone around you." The word collaboratively seemed to hit Vivian like a physical blow. Her already pale face paled further. Her carefully constructed facade of confidence wavered visibly. She had a history of interpersonal conflicts, as Eleanor well knew, and the mention of close monitoring, especially regarding collaboration, was a direct assault on her previous modus operandi. The power dynamics in the room had shifted irrevocably. Eleanor leaned back, her voice now firm and entirely devoid of the warmth Vivian expected from her mother-in-law. "At Morrison Consulting, we uphold very high standards. Professional behavior, mutual respect, and dignity are not merely buzzwords here, Vivian. They are the bedrock of our culture. Any deviation from these principles will not be tolerated. Our expectations are clear, and consequences for non-compliance are swift and severe." The unspoken implication of termination hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the easygoing leniency Vivian might have anticipated. Vivian swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing. She managed a weak, "Of course, Ms. Morrison. Professionalism is very important to me." The statement sounded hollow, even to her own ears, a stark reminder of her recent dismissal. Eleanor then slid a neatly printed contract across the polished desk. "Here is your employment agreement. It outlines your responsibilities, our company policies, and your annual salary." She tapped a finger on the figure. "As you can see, we've matched your request of $95,000 per year." Vivian's eyes darted to the number, and for a fleeting moment, a spark of genuine gratitude, or perhaps just relief, flickered in her eyes. She had clearly been desperate for this income. "Thank you, Ms. Morrison," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "We believe in rewarding excellence. Eleanor continued, her gaze unwavering. But excellence here means consistency. It means showing up every single day, ready to work hard, ready to contribute, and ready to treat every single one of your colleagues with the same respect you expect to receive. No exceptions. Vivian picked up the pen, her hand trembling slightly as she signed her name, Vivian Williams, to the bottom of the contract. The contrast to her usual dismissive tone, her habitual use of Eleanor's first name, was striking. Now it was Ms. Morrison, delivered with an almost fearful deference. Eleanor waited for the ink to dry, then retrieved the document. Excellent. Sarah will show you to your workspace. She will also walk you through our IT systems and introduce you to your immediate team. Welcome aboard, Vivian. The finality in her tone was unmistakable. The meeting was over. Vivian rose, her movement stiff, and turned towards the door. She reached for the handle, undoubtedly eager to escape the suffocating intensity of the room, to process the bewildering turn of events. Just as her hand touched the cool metal, Eleanor's voice, soft but sharp, cut through the quiet. Oh, and Vivian? Vivian froze, slowly turning back, her face a mask of apprehension. Eleanor smiled, a thin, knowing smile that held 1,000 unspoken meanings. I trust you'll find the work environment here much more to your liking than other situations you've been in recently, especially when it comes to the quality of the interactions. Vivian's face flushed a deep crimson. The thinly veiled reference to her recent job loss due to interpersonal conflicts, combined with the obvious jab at her Thanksgiving performance, hit home with brutal precision. She offered a quick, choked nod, then practically fled the office, the door closing with a soft click behind her. Moments later, Eleanor's phone buzzed. It was a text from Leo. Vivian's very upset about Thanksgiving. She says she feels really bad about what happened. Can we do dinner soon? Maybe make up for it. Eleanor typed her reply, a sense of profound satisfaction warming her. I'm feeling much better, sweetheart. In fact, I think things are about to get very interesting. She pressed send, her thumb lingering on the screen. The game had truly begun. She leaned back in her chair, the city sprawling beneath her. For years, she had felt like a pawn in her own life, manipulated and dismissed. But now she held all the cards. And she was finally ready to play them, not just perfectly, but with exquisite precision. By noon, the quiet hum of the Morrison consulting office was subtly infused with a different kind of energy, curiosity. Everyone was well aware of the new senior marketing coordinator, Vivian Williams, especially after her early morning arrival and the lengthy private meeting with Miss Morrison. Morrison herself. Whispers circulated, glances were exchanged, and everyone seemed to notice Vivian's visible struggle to maintain her professional composure. Eleanor, from the discreet vantage point of her corner office, watched it all unfold. She observed Vivian's interactions closely. There were the forced smiles, almost painfully wide, and the overly aggressive handshakes with colleagues, delivered with a performative enthusiasm that felt disingenuous. It was clear Vivian was uncomfortable, attempting to project an image of confident professionalism, while beneath the surface, she was undoubtedly rattled and trying to regain control. Precisely at 12 o'clock p.m., Eleanor signaled Sarah. A few minutes later, Sarah delivered Vivian's first assignment, a thick binder and a brief typed memo. The project was the rebranding strategy for Henderson Manufacturing, one of Morrison Consulting's most prestigious and demanding clients. It was a deliberately chosen assignment, high pressure, incredibly complex, and most importantly, burdened with an impossibly tight deadline. This was designed not merely to challenge Vivian, but to unequivocally reveal her true professional capabilities, or lack thereof. 20 minutes later, a tentative knock sounded on Eleanor's door. Vivian stood there, an uncharacteristic uncertainty in her posture. Miss Morrison, she began, her voice hesitant. I've reviewed the Henderson project. It's quite substantial. Perhaps I could start with something a little smaller, just to get familiar with the company processes, the internal systems, before diving into something of this magnitude. Eleanor fixed Vivian with a steady, unblinking gaze. Vivian, your resume explicitly boasts extensive experience in leading high-stakes rebranding initiatives, and a proven track record of managing complex client portfolios under stringent deadlines. Are you now suggesting that those claims were embellished? Do you feel unqualified for a project of this nature, despite your stated expertise? Vivian's face flushed a deep red. She stammered, No, not at all, Ms. Morrison. It's just the onboarding process, the new environment. I simply thought a gradual integration might be more effective. She was stumbling, utterly unable to justify her request without undermining her own carefully constructed professional image. Eleanor remained unmoved. Vivian, the preliminary presentation for Henderson Manufacturing is scheduled for this Friday. That gives you precisely 3.5 days to grasp the client's brief, develop a comprehensive strategy, and prepare a compelling set of mock-ups and a presentation deck. This is a crucial client, and we operate with a very lean, efficient team. Every member is expected to perform at their highest capacity from day one. That is our expectation, and that is why we hired you based on your impressive resume. Realization dawned on Vivian's face. She was trapped. The golden handcuffs of the $95,000 salary had just tightened. She reluctantly nodded. Understood, Ms. Morrison. I'll start immediately. As the afternoon wore on, Eleanor continued her silent observation. She noticed Vivian's contrasting interactions, obsequiously charming and deferential when speaking with senior staff members or anyone she perceived as holding power, but dismissive and impatiently curt with junior employees or those in support roles. It was a pattern Eleanor recognized all too well from her daughter-in-law's behavior in their personal lives. The breaking point came around 4:00 p.m. Eleanor overheard a loud, sharp exchange near the graphic design department. Vivian, her voice imperious, was standing over Daniel Lee, the head of graphic design, a talented but quiet man who had been with Morrison Consulting for years. I need these mock-ups on my desk by tomorrow morning. First thing, Vivian declared, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Henderson is a priority. Daniel, looking stressed, tried to explain. Ms. Williams, I have 3 other priority projects from Ms. Morrison herself, all with deadlines this week. I simply can't drop everything for this without clearing it with her first. My team is already stretched thin. Vivian scoffed. I am the senior marketing coordinator. When I give you an assignment, you do it. Period. You don't question it, and you certainly don't need to check with Ms. Morrison every time I ask for something. This is a direct order. Henderson takes precedence. Her voice was laced with an arrogance that made Eleanor's blood boil. Eleanor stepped out of her office, her presence immediately commanding attention. The entire area fell silent. Vivian, she said, her voice calm but resonating with authority. A word. Vivian jumped, startled, her face paling. Eleanor approached Daniel, offering him a reassuring nod. Daniel, please continue with your current priorities. We'll discuss the Henderson project internally. Then she turned her attention back to Vivian, her gaze steely. Effective leadership, Vivian, means collaborating with your colleagues, not dictating to them. It means understanding workloads and priorities, not making arbitrary demands. Without another word, Eleanor turned and walked back into her office, leaving Vivian standing amidst the silent, watchful employees. A few moments later, Eleanor called Vivian into her office. Vivian, Eleanor began, her tone low and firm, what I just witnessed out there is entirely unacceptable. Daniel Chen is a highly valued member of this team, a professional who deserves respect. Demanding that he abandon existing high-priority tasks without consultation and speaking to him with such a dismissive tone not only undermines his authority, but also our entire company culture of mutual respect. Eleanor paused, letting her words sink in. Let me be perfectly clear. This is not how we operate here. Your professional conduct, particularly in how you interact with your colleagues, is non-negotiable. If I hear about any more incidents like what just happened, any more disrespect, any more attempts to dictate rather than collaborate, we'll need to have a much more serious conversation about whether this position is the right fit for you at Morrison Consulting. Her veiled threat hung heavy in the air, a silent promise of consequences. Vivian, for the first time, looked truly afraid. Wednesday morning dawned, and with it, a completely transformed Vivian walked into the office. Gone were the immaculate coiffure and the tailored dresses. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles smudged beneath her eyes, and her usually flawless makeup was absent. Her expression was frazzled, weary, a testament to the late nights she had undoubtedly spent trying to salvage the Henderson rebranding project. The confident, polished veneer had cracked, revealing a frantic, unprepared individual beneath. Eleanor observed from her office, a quiet satisfaction settling over her. She watched Vivian, head bowed over her computer, frantically Googling basic marketing concepts and calling former colleagues, her voice low and desperate. It was clear Vivian was out of her depth, struggling to piece together a coherent strategy for the high-stakes project. She was trying to fake her way through it, just as Eleanor had suspected. At their 9 a.m. progress meeting, Vivian entered Eleanor's office, clutching a folder with a visibly trembling hand. She began her presentation, attempting to exude an air of professionalism, but her voice quivered slightly. What followed was a disorganized mess, copied paragraphs lifted from obscure online articles, generic buzzwords strung together without genuine understanding, and amateur charts that bore little resemblance to actual data. It was clear she had cobbled it together from superficial research, avoiding the deep analytical work required. Eleanor listened patiently, her face betraying no emotion. When Vivian finally concluded, a nervous sweat beading on her forehead, Eleanor calmly declared, her voice cutting through the tense silence, "Vivian, this is unacceptable." Her words were not shouted, but delivered with a cold precision that was far more impactful. "This presentation is fundamentally flawed, from concept to execution. It lacks original thought, actionable insights, and any genuine strategic analysis. Our client, Henderson Manufacturing, operates in a highly competitive market, and a proposal like this would not only fail to impress them, but would likely terminate our contract due to gross incompetence." Vivian, momentarily regaining a sliver of her old bravado, attempted to defend her work. "But Ms. Morrison, the data is estimated. It's a preliminary overview, a starting point. I haven't had time to—" Eleanor cut her off, her voice sharper now. "Estimated, Vivian? Or fictional? These numbers are entirely baseless. They are not preliminary data points. They are amateur guesses. You have clearly tried to shortcut the research and analysis, presenting a superficial facade rather than substantive work. This isn't how we do business. This isn't what a senior marketing coordinator earning $95,000 a year is paid to deliver." Humbled, defeated, Vivian finally dropped all pretense. Her shoulders slumped and her eyes, devoid of their usual spark, looked up at Eleanor with genuine vulnerability. It was a look Eleanor had never seen on her daughter-in-law's face, not in 5 years. "What do you want me to do?" she quietly asked, the arrogance completely stripped away. Eleanor leaned forward, her gaze softening slightly, but her voice remaining firm. "I want you to start over, Vivian, and this time I want you to actually do the work instead of trying to fake your way through it. I want you to understand the client, the market, and the strategic imperatives. I want you to apply critical thinking, not just buzzwords." Then Eleanor slid a thick, meticulously organized folder across the desk. Inside, Vivian could see detailed reports, comprehensive market surveys, competitor analyses, and client demographic profiles. It was a treasure trove of real, actionable market research compiled by Eleanor's dedicated team over weeks of work. Vivian's expression shifted, rapidly cycling through relief at the unexpected resources, and then overwhelming dread at the sheer volume and complexity of the information laid bare before her. It was clear that the level of detail and analytical depth was far beyond anything she had previously encountered, or perhaps ever produced. "This is the actual research, Vivian," Eleanor explained. "This is the foundation upon which real strategic proposals are built. This is the kind of material our senior marketing coordinators are expected to process, synthesize, and leverage to create genuine value. That is why you earn $95,000 a year." Eleanor's tone grew colder. "Your performance so far has been deeply disappointing. Any other employee delivering work of this caliber would be facing immediate termination, regardless of their resume claims." Eleanor paused, letting the severity of her words sink in. "I'm giving you one last chance to demonstrate that you possess the competence you claim. You have until Friday morning to present a genuine strategic analysis based on this research. No more estimated data, No more copied paragraphs. Prove to me and to yourself that you are capable of doing this job. Vivian, her face chalk white, simply nodded. She gathered the thick folder, her hands still trembling, and left the office without another word. As the door closed, Eleanor allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. Leo, her son, had no idea of his wife's professional struggles, just as he had no idea of his mother's immense success. He was still caught in the illusion Vivian had carefully crafted, both for herself and for Eleanor. Later that afternoon, a soft sound carried from the design department into Eleanor's office. It was Vivian's voice, lower and more sincere than Eleanor had ever heard it. She was speaking to Daniel Lee. "Daniel," Vivian said, "I truly apologize for my behavior yesterday. It was unprofessional and completely out of line. I was under immense pressure, but that's no excuse. I was wrong. Can we start over? I genuinely need your help with the Henderson project, and I want to collaborate properly." Eleanor felt a fleeting pang of something akin to pity. It was quickly overridden, however, by the vivid memory of the spittle on her face, the casual cruelty of Vivian's words on Thanksgiving. Vivian was learning, albeit the hard way, not just how to do her job, but perhaps more importantly, how to treat other human beings with basic decency. The lesson, Eleanor knew, was far from over. Thursday morning's progress meeting was a stark contrast to the disaster of Wednesday. Vivian, though still showing lingering signs of fatigue, appeared once again transformed. Her hair was neatly pulled back, her attire professional, and she walked into Eleanor's office with a quiet poise. The frantic desperation was gone, replaced by a genuine confidence rooted in actual preparation. She laid out her revised Henderson manufacturing strategy, and this time it was competent, solid, and clearly demonstrated that she had not only analyzed the provided research, but had also deeply understood it. The charts were clean, the data was real, and the proposed actions were strategically sound. Eleanor reviewed the presentation slides, her gaze meticulous. She nodded slowly. "This is much better, Vivian," she stated, her voice softer than it had been all week. "This shows a clear understanding of the client's needs and a thoughtful approach to their challenges. This is the quality of work we expect." Vivian, meeting Eleanor's gaze directly, offered a small, almost vulnerable smile. "Thank you, Ms. Morrison. I realize now I was trying too hard to impress initially, rather than focusing on doing good, solid work. I got lost in the performance." It was a genuine admission, an honesty Eleanor had scarcely believed possible from her daughter-in-law. Eleanor returned the faint smile. "Good, because you'll be presenting this strategy to the client tomorrow morning, and I will be observing." Vivian's newfound composure wavered for a split second. A flicker of apprehension crossed her face at the thought of Eleanor's presence during the high-stakes meeting, but she quickly regained control, simply nodding. Eleanor, of course, offered no further explanation for her attendance. She wanted to see how Vivian performed under real pressure, not just in the quiet of her office. That evening, as the autumn twilight deepened outside, Leo called Eleanor. His voice sounded tired, more like the weary man who had arrived on Thanksgiving than the hopeful voice from the day before. "Hey, Mom," he said, a sigh escaping him. "Vivian's really stressed about this new project at work. She's been pulling all-nighters. Says it's a huge client." He didn't elaborate, still completely unaware of the true nature of Vivian's new job. Eleanor listened, her heart skipping a beat. "Oh, really? Is it a difficult project?" "Yeah, apparently it's pretty intense," Leo replied. He paused, then his voice took on a more contemplative tone. "You know, Mom, Vivian's been different lately, like really different. She's more thoughtful, I guess. It's like she's actually thinking about how her actions affect other people, not just herself." Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. This was it. This was the moment she had hoped for. The true testament to her plan. Leo continued, his voice softer now, tinged with a surprise that was almost childlike. "She actually apologized to me last night for being so controlling about our time together. About me seeing you. She said she realized she'd been unfair and that she'd put me in a difficult position. She said she was wrong to try and keep us apart." A wave of emotion washed over Eleanor. Leo, her sensitive, kind son, was finally seeing. He was recognizing the patterns, the manipulation, the isolation that had almost fractured their bond. She even said she regretted how she'd acted at Thanksgiving. Leo added, his voice low. She said she has no idea what came over her and that she was just so stressed, but that it wasn't right. Eleanor let him speak, her own throat tight with emotion. It wasn't about the apology for Thanksgiving anymore. It was about the deeper awakening. And Mom, Leo continued, his voice firming, I told her she was right. I told her I shouldn't have let her make all the decisions about our family relationships. It wasn't fair to you, and it wasn't fair to me. I missed you so much. Tears pricked Eleanor's eyes. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, her voice thick. I missed you too. I love you, Mom, Leo said, the words simple, heartfelt, and utterly free of the tension that had clouded them for so long. I love you too, my darling boy, Eleanor replied, a genuine warmth spreading through her chest. Then Leo proposed, how about dinner on Sunday? Just the three of us. But different this time. We'll go somewhere nice. My treat, a real family dinner where everyone can actually enjoy themselves. Eleanor agreed, her heart brimming. After they hung up, she sat in quiet reflection, the phone still warm in her hand. The profound shift in family dynamics, the strange, sometimes circuitous workings of justice filled her mind. Regardless of how Vivian performed at the Henderson presentation tomorrow, the balance of power had finally, decisively moved in Eleanor's favor. Leo was waking up, and that was the greatest victory of all. More importantly, it seemed Vivian was finally learning the crucial lesson Eleanor had intended to impart. Not just about professional competence, but about something far more fundamental. Respect is earned through decency, through hard work, through collaboration, and through treating others with kindness. Not demanded through intimidation or passive aggression. The seeds of change had been sown, and Eleanor felt a quiet hope for the harvest. Friday morning arrived, crisp and clear. Vivian, remarkably, exuded a newfound calm as she prepared for the Henderson manufacturing presentation. Gone was the frantic energy of earlier in the week. In its place was a professional demeanor, grounded in preparation and genuine effort. Eleanor watched from a slight distance as Vivian greeted Mr. Harrison and Ms. Davies, the two key clients from Henderson. Her handshake was firm, her smile authentic, and her initial small talk displayed competence rather than a forced aggressive charm. For the next 45 minutes, Vivian delivered a genuinely professional presentation. She spoke with clarity and conviction, detailing the strategic analysis and actionable solutions she had meticulously crafted. Her voice was steady, her points well articulated, and her mastery of the data was evident. It was a stark contrast to the disorganized mess she had presented just 2 days prior. When challenged on potential implementation risks, Vivian didn't falter. She responded with a measured, phased approach, outlining contingencies and realistic timelines. Ms. Davies, a notoriously tough client, even nodded approvingly. I like your under-promise and over-deliver philosophy, Miss Williams, she remarked. It's refreshing. Vivian handled all detailed questions with an impressive grasp of the material, using both data and honest, well-reasoned estimates where precise figures weren't yet available. By the end, she had clearly won the client's approval. Crucially, when discussing the research that underpinned her strategy, Vivian paused, her gaze briefly meeting Eleanor's. I have to give immense credit to Ms. Morrison and the entire Morrison consulting team for their comprehensive research support, she stated, her voice clear and sincere. Without their meticulous groundwork, this robust strategy wouldn't have been possible. It was a genuine acknowledgement, a public display of humility and gratitude that deeply resonated with Eleanor. After Mr. Harrison and Ms. Davies departed, their faces alight with satisfaction, Vivian turned to Eleanor, her composure finally breaking. Her eyes were bright, not with pride but with emotion. Mrs. Morrison, she began, her voice thick with uncharacteristic vulnerability. Eleanor, I'm so sorry, not just for Thanksgiving, but for everything. For years of using people, for thinking I could just bluff my way through life, for never understanding how to actually earn respect. A tear tracked a path down her cheek. I don't think I ever understood the difference between being strong and being cruel, Vivian confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I thought they were the same. I was wrong. The genuine remorse in her eyes, in her words, was something Eleanor had waited years to see. Eleanor reached across the table, placing a hand gently on Vivian's arm. People can change, Vivian, she said softly, but only if they actually want to. Only if they are willing to put in the hard work, to learn and to grow. Vivian looked up, her eyes earnest. I want to, Eleanor. Truly, I want to. Eleanor nodded, then continued to perform well at work. Continue to treat your colleagues with respect. Earn your place here and in your life. Her gaze softened, and perhaps there's still a path forward for us, for our family. That evening, Leo called, his voice lighter than Eleanor had heard it in years. Mom, dinner tonight, remember? Vivian's been in the kitchen all afternoon. She's trying to practice your old recipes. Says she wants to do it right this time. When Eleanor arrived at their home, she was met with an unfamiliar warmth. Vivian, her hair still in a slightly messy bun, was wearing the apron Eleanor had given her as a wedding gift, one that had never been worn before tonight. The house smelled not of expensive perfume, but of rosemary and roasting vegetables, and something else, something softer and more genuine. The meal itself, while not perfectly executed, was a revelation. It was filled with laughter, with honest conversation, and with a genuine family interaction that Eleanor had almost forgotten. As dessert was served, Vivian took a deep breath. Leo, she began, her voice steady, there's something important Eleanor needs to tell you, and something I need to confess. She then looked at Eleanor, who gave a small, encouraging nod. Leo, Vivian continued, Morrison Consulting. Eleanor owns it. It's her company. Leo's jaw dropped. He stared at his mother, then at Vivian, his eyes wide with utter astonishment. Mom, is that true? You own Morrison Consulting? Why didn't you ever tell me? Eleanor smiled, a serene, knowing smile. Because, sweetheart, she explained, I wanted to see if my family would value me for who I was, for the love I had to give, not for what I could provide, or for the wealth I possessed. I needed to see your true colors, unclouded by any other influence. Then Vivian took over. She recounted with unflinching honesty every manipulation, every passive-aggressive comment, every subtle dig, every calculated attempt to isolate Leo from his mother. She described the contempt she had felt, the way she had treated Eleanor's home and her cooking. And finally she confessed in agonizing detail to the Thanksgiving insult, how she had deliberately spat in Eleanor's face, demanding she cook it all again. Leo listened, his face transforming from shock to horror, then to a simmering, righteous anger. He looked at Vivian, his eyes blazing. You spat in my mother's face? Vivian, that's assault. That's unforgivable. He turned to Eleanor, his own eyes filling with tears. Mom, I am so sorry. I should have seen it. I should have defended you. Then he turned back to Vivian, his voice low and dangerous. Vivian, he said, his words measured, firm. I love you. I do. But if you ever treat my mother like that again, if you ever disrespect her in any way, I will leave you. I mean it. I cannot and will not tolerate that kind of behavior towards my mother or anyone. Vivian, tears streaming down her face, nodded, her voice choked with emotion. I understand, Leo. I promise you, it will never happen again. Eleanor drove home that night, not with triumph, but with a deep, abiding peace. Vivian continued to improve, both at work and, more importantly, within their family dynamics. The lessons, painstakingly taught, had been learned. 6 months later, Leo called to Eleanor, his voice bursting with unadulterated joy. Mom, he exclaimed, Vivian's pregnant. We're going to have a baby. He paused, then added, his voice softer, and we really want you to be involved, Mom. Vivian wants you to teach her all your old recipes for our child. She says she wants our baby to grow up knowing what real family food tastes like. Eleanor smiled, a genuine, radiant joy blossoming in her heart. She had given Vivian a chance to become a better person, and Vivian, against all odds, had taken it. The spitting had been horrific, but it had also been the catalyst for a true chance at healing, reconciliation, and the forging of new, mutually respectful bonds. A new beginning, indeed.